Welcome to a deep dive. Today, we're unpacking something pretty significant.
Definitely. We're looking at the Iran-Israel conflict, which, well, it's been simmering for ages, but according to the material we're looking at, it really changed this year, 2025.
That's right. We've got excerpts here from a text called From Shadows to Fire, Iran and Israel Unmasked. And our mission, really, for you listening, is to go past the headlines. We want to understand the story this source tells, the history, the flashpoint in 2025, the human side of it, and, well, where things might go.
Basically pulling out the key insights from this source, yeah. Getting the core story.
Exactly. So let's start where the source does back in 1979.
Yeah.
It flags the Islamic Revolution in Iran as the starting pistol.
Right, because that's when the whole relationship flipped. The new government declared Israel illegitimate, completely changed the game.
And for decades after that, it wasn't like there was peace, but it wasn't open war either. It was this shadow war, as the source calls it.
Yeah, that's a good term for it. Not state versus state on a battlefield,
Yeah.
Much more covert.
And the source details how Iran played that game, mainly funding and arming proxy groups.
Right. Hezbollah, Hamas, groups like that, using them to exert pressure, often from places like Lebanon or Gaza. It kept things at arm's length, sort of.
Well, Israel, according to the material, had its own playbook. Things like targeted assassinations, lots of airstrikes, especially in Syria.
Yeah, hitting Iranian assets or weapons heading to Hezbollah. And cyber attacks, too, the source mentions. It was this constant kind of push and pull, but mostly kept quiet.
And what's really interesting is the source's point that, nobody was admitting it. Neither side was saying we are at war, but it was always there.
Boiling beneath the surface is the phrase used, because admitting it would have been a massive escalation in itself, wouldn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Which brings us nicely to these red lines the source talks about, the ones Israel supposedly set.
Yeah, boundaries they signaled, maybe not always in a speech, but through actions, things they wouldn't tolerate.
And the text lists three main ones. First, absolutely no nuclear weapons for Iran. That's number one.
Non-negotiable, yeah. Second, no permanent Iranian military bases or, like, a significant buildup right near Israel's borders.
And third, stopping really advanced weapons, the game-changing stuff, from getting to Hezbollah.
Those were the key ones highlighted.
But the source points out that Iran, well, it seems they kept pushing those boundaries, interpreted by Israel as crossing the lines anyway.
Yeah, the text says Iran ignored these red lines, essentially continuing its activities.
Which led to Israel's response, described as strike back, again and again.
Right. That pattern became predictable, didn't it? Violation, counterstrike, violation, counterstrike, for years.
Until it didn't anymore. Until that pattern just broke.
And that's where the source really shifts gears, focusing on the eruption into open conflict.
The key date it points to is June 13th, 2025. That's pinpointed as the turning point.
On that day, Israel launched something it called Operation Rising Lion.
And this felt different. The source describes over 100 strikes, crucially, inside Iran.
Inside Iran itself. That's the major shift, targeting things like nuclear sites, missile bases, IRGC command centers.
There's a Revolutionary Guard Corps, yeah. And the source notes a human cost over 200 dead inside Iran from these strikes. It calls it Israel's loudest message yet.
Definitely no more shadows there. That's very overt.
And Iran's reaction, according to the source, pretty much immediate.
Swift and direct. They called their response Operation True Promise 3.
And again, mirroring Israel's move, this was direct too. The source says missiles targeted Tel Aviv and Haifa, major Israeli cities.
And it adds a detail that the U.S. Embassy was also hit in that barrage, which obviously brings in another whole dimension.
Yeah, raises the stakes even further. The source sums up the global feeling at that moment really well. It just says the world holds its breath.
You can imagine going from covert ops to missiles on major cities. Everyone watching must have felt the tension spike.
Absolutely. And, after laying out these military actions, the source does something important. It shifts focus.
To the people, right. The civilians actually living through this.
Exactly. Because it's not just about strategy and targets. There's a real human cost. The text describes scenes in Tehran families sleeping in underground garages for safety.
Just trying to find shelter. And it paints a similar picture in Israel's schools closing down, the sound of air raid sirens becoming, almost normal. Terrifyingly normal.
There's that one really stark detail the source mentions about kids' drawings.
Oh yeah, changing from like butterflies and houses
to bombs and explosions. It just hits home, doesn't it? The psychological impact.
It really does, and the source nails it with that simple line. Fear doesn't wear a uniform.
Gets through the politics, reminding you these are real people on both sides, caught in the middle.
Yeah, it connects the whole conflict back to a universal human experience.
So we've gone from the shadows to this very visible, violent confrontation. What does the source say about, well, what now? Future.
Well, it frames the outlook as deeply uncertain, highly precarious.
Interestingly, it notes that both sides, Iran and Israel, are apparently saying they don't want full war.
Right, that's the public or maybe even private stance trying to avoid an all-out catastrophic conflict.
But, and it's a big but, the source immediately contrasts that with the reality on the ground. It describes both as armed, angry, ready.
Which sounds like a recipe for accidental escalation, doesn't it? Even if they say they don't want it, the pieces are all there.
High potential for miscalculation. Though the source does mention some diplomatic efforts. Peace talks are being floated quietly.
So maybe some back channels are open, some attempts to pull things back from the brink?
But then you have all the complicating factors the text lists. Rising oil prices, squeezing economies.
Yeah, global power is kind of posturing, taking sides, or trying to manage the situation.
And underneath it all, those looming nuclear fears just add this extra layer of, well, dread.
Exactly. So the source doesn't offer easy answers. It basically concludes nothing is certain.
Which feels about right, given everything. It really emphasizes how volatile things are. So if we pull all this together, the main thread from this source, from shadows to fire, is really about that transformation, isn't it?
Absolutely. The core idea is that this conflict isn't hidden anymore. It's not deniable. It's now, as the source puts it, visible, violent, and very, very real.
The shadow war is over.
Seems so. And what comes next? The source is clear. That chapter is still unwritten.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty significant question to think about. Drawing from this material, how does this fundamental change moving from covert actions and proxies to direct state-on-state strikes inside home territory, how does that change the entire game?
Yeah, what are the new rules, if any?
Right, not just for Iran and Israel, but for the whole region, for the international community. Does this open up new paths for escalation we haven't seen before? Or maybe could the sheer visibility force different kinds of de-escalation? What happens now that the shadow's gone?
A lot to consider as this situation continues to develop.